Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke from sunny San Diego, I'm Greg Carlwood, and today is quite a show, because as we continue our quest to nail down and identify the puppet masters of the power pyramid and unravel our lost history, we've been hearing the term Archon thrown around more than tear gas in Baltimore as the quintessential apex of humanity's problems. And our guest today probably knows more about the Archons and that possibility than anyone else I could put before you. Largely credited with bringing the Gnostic intel to the internet in 2002, his name is John Lash, lifelong student and teacher of world mythology, Tantra, Buddhism, pre-Christian mysteries, and of course Gnosticism. He's the author of several books, including Not in His Image, and he's created quite a vast trove of suppressed information at metahistory.org. Here to give us the tools to fight back the control of the Archonic overlord, set the story straight, and drop Gnostic wisdom like a Johnny Appleseed of the Nag Hammadi texts, here he is. John, my man, welcome to THC.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, John, thanks for being here. It's a real pleasure. And I know we have to kind of start this thing by dedicating just a little time to the Sophia myth, because it really is the only true context for the Archon story, from what I understand. And not many guests give us that context, but I've also heard you say that this story of Sophia is the most suppressed and hidden story in all of mythology, which in our backwards world is usually a good indication that there's more reason to pay attention, wouldn't you say?
Well, it sure is. I mean, how many of us today who are trying to keep track of the insanity of the world and the false flag operations and the deceit of the media and the lies and machinations of the politicians and so forth and so on ad nauseum, how many of us have come to understand the simple fact that if something is repressed, or if you can't talk about it or know about it, it's probably really important for human survival. And that certainly applies to the intel of the Gnostics and to the what I call the Sophianic myth of the mysteries, the pre-Christian pagan mysteries. Historically speaking, the story of the Aeon Sophia, which you can consider as a narrative, call it a narrative or a myth, whichever you like, has been the single most repressed piece of knowledge in all of human history. And we're extremely lucky that we have even been able to recover this piece of knowledge from the mystery schools, this gem of a narrative, because of documents that were discovered in Egypt in 1945 and other materials, very meager materials, as you know, very scant materials in a rather shambolic and disordered condition. But nonetheless, if you apply discipline to organize those materials, as I have done, and if you pull together the plot, it turns out that the material from the Gnostics contains the single and comprehensive description of the origin of humanity and of life on this planet. The single coherent description.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's really a kind of a shock. That's such a big shock, I think, that even though I can say it in plain English, it doesn't necessarily register on people's minds, you know.
Right.
But that is a fact. It's not a claim I'm making about the Gnostic explanation of how humanity originated and the origin of extraterrestrial or alien intrusion upon our world, the origin of the planet itself, the origin of the three Abrahamic religions and all of this. I'm not just making a claim as if I were to say, well, I like this better than any other, and so I want you to think it's the best explanation around. It is the only complete and coherent explanation of those things that exists. That is a fact.
It is an epic narrative, man, and it does tie up so many loose threads. So maybe we can dive into the story a little bit. I know you've given plenty of lengthy interviews and breakdowns of the Sophia myth, but maybe we can recount the parts that are important and that we truly need to hear to understand the context of the Archons and understand how life works in this world, because it also explains quite a bit on that front too.
Well, it explains a great deal. But before we go into that, and I would love to give you, say, the 3 or 4 essential outstanding factors of the narrative, sure. But before we go into that, I want to make a sort of disclaimer, which is that this narrative is not something that can be spoon-fed to the human mind. So some of you may be hearing this narrative or hearing about this narrative for the first time. Others who know my work to a greater or lesser extent may already know the narrative. There is something going in that everyone should recognize, and everyone should take a moment to stop and reflect on what I'm going to say now. The Gnostic intel in the Sophianic narrative explaining the origin of life on Earth and the purpose of life cannot be received merely as information. You cannot receive it in a merely passive manner. The nature of this information is so powerful, it is like a psychoactive plant influencing your mind. When you take a psychoactive plant, you must interact with the intelligence of that plant. Isn't that correct?
That is true.
Right. Well, likewise, the Sophianic narrative is like a living entity. And it is so powerful that if you're going to take it on, if you're going to consider it, you must realize in the first place that you cannot be a passive recipient of this information, that you must become a participant. This is a requirement of the Gnostic intel. You must become a participant who evolves and develops this information actively. So I just want to put that out as an advisory message before we go into the narrative itself. How does that sound?
That's perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, what could I say to bring to the attention of someone hearing about this for the first time, for instance? What could I say by way of highlighting the four key factors of the Sophianic myth, the Sophianic vision story, as I call it? Well, it's quite simple to do that, because the nature of the human mind is to seek answers.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be a lot of people on the planet today. I don't know. How many people are supposed to be here?
I think
6.5 billion?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot of people. So there may be, who knows, a large number of those people who are not interested in the answers to certain ultimate questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that they've just lost interest.
Right.
But those human animals who are still awake and who are functioning as intelligent creatures, intelligent beings, are certainly going to have the craving and the need to ask certain questions. What are these questions? Okay. First of all, where does human life originate? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a question. How did the planet Earth itself come to exist? That's a question. Are there alien or external extraterrestrial entities who are inimical to the human species and who attack and prey on the human species? And how did they originate? That's a really big question.
Yes, it is.
And finally, just what is it about the human mind that has brought us to a situation in the world today where many things in our world, in our social order, in our collective life, seem to be going very, very badly wrong? Another way to formulate that question would be to say, perhaps, how did humanity get on such a track towards self-destruction as we see today, right? Well, these are all valid questions. And the Sophianic narrative answers these questions in a coherent and a very lucid manner. And so anyone who is still seeking for answers to those questions, if you're not satisfied with the answers that might come from religion, and you're still looking, would do well to consider what the Gnostics said. So I'll tell you now what they said, okay?
Perfect.
About these questions and how they answered these questions. First of all, what I call the Sophianic myth is really the story about a goddess. It's a narrative about a central character. And the character in that myth or narrative is a goddess, not a god. It's a female divine being on the cosmic or galactic level. And her name is Sophia, which means wisdom. We give her a name. We could give her other names, but this is the traditional name that comes to us with the intel, okay? We call this goddess Sophia, and the story that contains the answers to these ultimate questions is really her biography. Now that's simple enough, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, human beings love stories. So this is a story. It's not a made-up story, I must emphasize. It's a story that was constructed through many centuries of careful investigation and teamwork by shamans who were capable of investigating such mysteries. And so it is a story that comes from a source of high authenticity. So, what the Gnostics told us, these ancient seers or shamans called the Gnostics, was that in order to understand what we as human animals are doing on this planet, we have to go back to the origin of the human species, or the human genome, which they called the anthropos, which is a Greek word. You can translate that word as the seed or genome of the anthropine species. We are the anthropine species. So, how did our species originate? Well, the answer to that big question is that it originated in the core of the galaxy where we are currently located. So, the first thing I guess you could say, tell me what you think of this, but the first thing that people need to do who want to consider the Gnostic creation story, if you will, call it a creation story, is to understand that it is set in our galaxy. The setting is very important. That's true of any story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Think of any novel that you've ever read. Think of any movie you've ever seen. It has to be in a setting, doesn't it?
Of course.
Right. Well, the beautiful thing I find, or something that I myself find very appealing about the Gnostic myth, is that it tells you precisely what the setting is. The setting is not the universe at large. The setting is not some place beyond time and space where everything miraculously originates. No, the setting is in the galaxy that we are in. We inhabit a galaxy. Human beings living today, myself sitting here talking to you, and all of you out there listening, have one thing in common. We're all inhabiting a planet. That planet belongs to a solar system, that is to say, a central star with other planets, and that planetary system is embedded in the arms of a galaxy. This is the cosmic picture. We are, in fact, embedded in the third arm, counting from the center outward, in the third arm of a lenticular spiral galaxy, which has a core or hub, and it has 4 encircling arms in the form of like a pinwheel. That is the cosmic setting of the Sophianic myth. It does not purport to explain how the galaxies originated, and there are billions of such galaxies as we know today. It simply goes to our galaxy and goes to the core of our galaxy, and that's where the story of Sophia begins. So, technically speaking, this is an astronomical myth.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear?
That's very clear. And then I guess these beings, that Sophia being one of them, they live in the center of this galaxy, right?
That's right. That's right. According to the Gnostic seers who investigated the universe with their minds, who used their intelligence to explore not only the natural world but the cosmos of the stars and planets, according to them, at the center of our galaxy today, which is called the Milky Way galaxy, at the hub, which is about 20, said to be, in scientific terms, about 26,000 light years from where we are. We're out in the limbs, in the third limb, 26,000 light years toward the center of the galaxy. And there, at the hub, is a huge mass of luminosity. Now, what I'm saying here is something that astronomers and astrophysicists themselves would say. So the Gnostic myth is in many respects completely compatible with the modern scientific description of our galaxy. Totally compatible. So the galaxy consists of this core or hub and these spiral arms. And it has a lenticular structure. That is to say, if you look at it edge on, it is a bulge in the middle and then it narrows down to the edges. So it's lentil shaped. According to the Gnostics, this whole galaxy is alive, but it is alive in two different ways. The way that life appears at the core of the galaxy, which they call the pleroma, Pleroma, is different than the way that life appears in the four circling arms. But there is life all through the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
What they taught was that beings, actual living self-conscious beings, capable of divine beings, gods and goddesses, if you will, capable of volition, capable of acts of will, capable of perception, of seeing, feeling, sensing, just like other living creatures, inhabit the core of the galaxy. So the core of the galaxy, in which there are no stars and no planets, but only a kind of raw, unformed stellar luminosity, a vast ball of stellar luminosity, it was perceived by them to be the habitat of these beings, and they called them aeons, Aeons. So aeon is the Gnostic word for a god. And they discerned that there were male-gendered and female-gendered aeons. And that's not so difficult to understand, because if you think of the aeons, or Gnostic gods, as powerful currents of energy, massive torrents of energy, then you can understand that they would be comparable to positively and negatively charged fields.
Right.
Or, yeah, right. So that's the idea of sexuality or gender among these deities is not a big problem. So anyway, according to them, these beings should not be regarded as angelic. Don't picture them as angels with wings. Don't picture them as having any kind of anthropomorphic form. We can ascribe to them feelings, such as human animals have, and thought, as I said, and will, which we consider to be human properties. But they are not to be conceived as human forms. If you need to conceive them or visualize them, the best way to do it is to picture them as vast torrents or serpent-like currents of energy.
Serpent-like.
Serpent-like. That's the closest analogy and the most accurate analogy. They are like great sky dragons and great serpents of light that swim and circulate and swim and dance in the core of the galaxy. This is what the myth says. And the story of humanity begins there because the myth says very specifically that these aeons have a way that they pass their time. You see, they live for countless millions and millions of years. As long as the galaxy lives, they are living at the center of the galaxy. That is their habitat. They do not live in the galactic limbs. I'll get to what happens in the galactic limbs in a moment. So they live there, and it is their pleasure and their way to use their time, you might say, to perform experiments. So the way to think of them is, one way to think of them is as scientists, or kind of like artists and scientists, a combination, who love to perform and create experiments. And one of the ways that they do this is by designing life forms. They design genomic patterns, or what is technically called genomic plasm. And they design these plasms. So if you were to ask a Gnostic, well, where does human life originate? Where does the DNA of the human genome originate? They would say simply, it is designed in the galactic core by aeons for the purposes of conducting an experiment. This is the explanation they give for the origin of our life form and all other life forms in the galaxy, but we're only interested in ours at first because obviously, I think you would agree, if we don't understand our own life form and how and why it is designed, well, there's no point in understanding anything else, is there?
Agreed.
Right. So that's the explanation so far. To be more specific, they said that the human genome, of which I am an expression, every human animal, every human being who has ever lived is an expression of the human genome. As we know, the DNA of humanity is one consistent plasm, or it is one consistent matrix of nucleic acid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, yeah, nucleic acid. So this particular genome that came to be manifested as humanity on the earth was designed, according to the Gnostics, by two aeons, a male aeon called Thelete and a female aeon called Sophia. They gave them these names simply because for the purposes of human intelligence, we need names. We need to name things and define things in order to understand them. They're very limited terms, but nevertheless, they express the truth about the phenomena. Okay?
Perfect.
Right.
So there is an element at this point in the story, I believe, that is really interesting to me, and that's that it seems like this plasm has been doled out to places other than Earth in previous cycles, and apparently it originated near the Orion Nebula, which is interesting because there's authors who've written about the Vatican's interest in the Orion Nebula and all their symbolism and it hidden in their paintings, and so that's kind of a cross-reference that I found really interesting, but I'll let you pick the story up, but I just wanted to make that point about the Orion Nebula playing a role in this tale.
Yes, well, it's a good point because it brings us to the logical question which follows now. If the human genomic plasm was actually designed by these divine beings in the galactic core, then how did they deploy it so that it could unfold in an experiment? How did they deploy that plasm?
Right.
Well, according to the Gnostic view of our galaxy, there is no animal life or no sentient life, and there are not even stars or planets at the core of the galaxy, and science would agree on this, because the mass of stellar luminosity at the core of the galaxy is in a constant state of eruption that does not support any structures of life. So if life as we know it is going to appear and emerge in the galaxy, it has to have another environment in which it can appear. Well, that is what the galactic limbs provide. So the spiraling arms of the galaxy, which surround it, consist of a heavier kind of matter, unlike the matter at the core of the galaxy, which is pure stellar plasma and stellar luminosity. The matter that is swirling in the external limbs of the galaxy, and this also, by the way, is high school level astronomy that I'm talking here, consists of other kinds of matter that are heavier matter, elementary particles, and basically what is swirling around in the galactic arms is matter as we know it, the constituents of matter as we know it, the elements that form material worlds. So material planets can form in the external limbs of the galaxy, but they cannot form at the core. Nevertheless, at the core, the human genome and genomes of other creatures are designed. So the question is, how do you get that designer plasm out of the core and out into the galactic limbs so that it can eventually evolve into creatures who live in the worlds that arise in those limbs? I call the worlds that arise in the galactic limbs planetary laboratories, like the Earth. The Earth is a planetary laboratory. A laboratory is a place where an experiment takes place, and the subject of the experiment is a living creature or many living creatures, but in our case, we want to understand how we ourselves are the subject of the experiment. So the living creature of the anthropos emerges in planets which exist in the galactic arms. The way that this is done is described quite specifically in the Gnostic cosmological text, where they say that once the Aeons have designed a creature, a living plasm, they actually project it into the outer arms of the galaxy, which they do by a kind of method that could be compared to using the device that is used to fertilize an ovum artificially. A pipette, that's the word, okay? A pipette is a really long glass nozzle that has been used to capture a sperm when the sperm is then injected into the ovum in artificial insemination. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen that image, right?
Right.
From right. It's an image magnified, obviously by an electron microscope, many times. So you can see the living sperm being ejected down the channel of this glass tube, and then it is injected into the ovum. They use that kind of method, and what they do is they emanate from the galactic core a kind of stalk of light, which itself is an extension of the plasma of the core. And through that stalk of light, they implant the plasm that has been designed in some place in the galactic limbs. Now, there are many places that they could do that. So it follows from the logic of this description that there are many life forms evolving all around in our galaxy. And there are literally millions of planets that support different life forms in our galaxy. So in order for this process to develop in the way that is of interest to the Aeons, they like to have the experiment be left to its own development. So they don't control the experiment after a certain point. Once the human genome was designed, it was implanted in the third arm of this spiral galaxy in a particular place. And there are places in the spiral arms, locations that are especially favorable to the nesting of these plasms. And these places are called molecular clouds. go look up what is a molecular cloud. The Orion Nebula is a molecular cloud.
Hmm.
And what scientists now know, and to my knowledge, this has only been a matter of common knowledge to astrophysicists for about maybe 10 years, is that these molecular clouds, such as you see in the Orion Nebula, M42, are saturated with water. Well, don't you think that a cloud of water, a cloud of mist, it's immense, by the way, it's immensely more huge than the solar system, would be an ideal place to deposit this living plasm, because we know that life needs water, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And so, according to that scenario, the Aeons implanted this genome, which had been designed by Thelete and Sophia in the Orion Nebula in the molecular cloud, and then they just let it be. Well, what happens next? Well, the Aeons do not control the way that the experiment unfolds. They're really interested in letting the experiments happen according to the conditions provided by the cosmos. And according to those conditions, as we know today, there are filaments of plasm, electrified plasm, that run all through the galactic arms. And these filaments of plasm are able to capture these plasma filaments, rather, are able to capture these genomes and transplant them through space. This idea, then, is that life on Earth comes from outer space.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fact. But it does not just come from anywhere in outer space. It comes from a molecular cloud in outer space that has itself been seeded from the core of the galaxy. This is the description you get astronomically from the Gnostic materials.
And then does it come out kind of like mushroom spores?
I would say that mushroom spores are the best example that we have of how this process unfolds.
And I find that interesting because there's a lot of psychedelic proponents, people who are fans of the magic mushroom, who talk about its innate intelligence and talk about how, spores are one of the very few things, or the only thing that I think modern science can say can survive in a vacuum. So this theory that it's seeded from a mushroom, this has parallels to other people's interpretations also. So I find that to be an interesting footnote also.
Well, it's more than a footnote. I think it's a piece of intel from the indigenous wisdom of our tribe of humanity, from the indigenous peoples who have used these psychoactive mushrooms and modern day psychonauts. It's a piece of intel that's totally complementary with the Gnostic intel. You could say that the Gnostic intel teaches that the human genome, the DNA from which human animals develop, pre-exists in spores that are captured in a molecular cloud in Orion. And those spores are subject to drift out of that cloud on plasmic filaments, which are now known to exist and to penetrate the galactic arms. If you go to plasma cosmology or the electric universe people, they talk about this constantly. They talk about these plasma filaments that run between stars and that run through interstellar space. So these plasma filaments are like currents that can carry these seeds of life. Lynn Margulis, who was one of the originators of Gaia theory or the Gaia hypothesis, did not adhere to the Gnostic view of life. I discussed it with her at some length, and she knew about it because she read my book. But in fact, her view of how life originated was identical with what the Gnostics said. She called these spores propagules. And she said that these spores that contain life in a freeze-dried form are able to survive through vast distances of interstellar space, through the vacuum of space, and through very intense cold. And then when they drift down into a planetary atmosphere and settle into a planetary environment that is warm and moist, they burst open and they propagate life. So she called them propagules. So we here speaking today, you and I and everyone who's listening, are here on the planet because propagules floated into the atmosphere of the Earth, were carried toward the atmosphere of the Earth by plasma filaments, and were seeded in the atmosphere of the Earth. That is why there is human life on the planet Earth today.
Man, it is such a rich and dense story, and it makes a lot of sense. But we are almost a quarter of the way through this thing, and we have so much story left. Can we, because I have a lot of questions for you about how this relates to the real world today, major religions, our modern geopolitics. So maybe we can bring it up to how the Earth was formed, and the Archons kind of come out of that same event, right?
Sure. If you give us, I'm looking at the clock, if you give us 15 more minutes on the mythological background, then we can fast forward to those other subjects.
That is perfect, John.
Okay. So now we come to the question of, well, does that mean that other strains of this human anthropos plasm have seeded on other planets in this galaxy? Well, absolutely, yes. And currently, right now, as I speak, there are probably other strains of the same human genome living on other Earth-like planets here and there around the galaxy. Most certainly, highly, highly probable. You know, one of the discoveries of science in the last 10 years that has been most, let's say, that has gotten a lot of attention is the existence of many Earth-like planets. Isn't that true?
It is.
Right. So there are other Earth-like planets. There are other planetary laboratories in which other strains of humanity are evolving, completely independent of us. And the Aeons in the galactic center, using their divine powers of observation, are observing these experiments and watching how they develop. They're not interfering with them. They don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end planned for these experiments because they like to leave the experiments open-ended. You could say that the divine gods of the galaxy respect the freedom of the experiment, and it may crash, it may go bad, or it may develop in a beautiful and harmonious way. This is what makes it interesting. But now we come to a really peculiar point about Gnostic cosmology. It's not correct to say that the Earth is just another planet which happened to arise in the galactic arms due to the perpetual conditions of the materialization and dematerialization of stars and planets. It's not correct to say that. Because the Gnostics said, and this is probably the most famous line you can quote from the Gnostic materials. It's from the Gospel of Philip, and it's one single line, and it says, "The world system you inhabit came about due to an anomaly." Now, some scholars translate as that last word as a mistake. The world system that you, human beings, inhabit came about due to a mistake, due to an anomaly or something that was not predicted to happen. And the actual Greek word in the text is anomou, A-N-A-M-O-U. So I prefer the word anomaly to mistake, because mistake sort of has a judgment attached to it. It wasn't a mistake, but the planet Earth arose in a very bizarre manner. Normally, planets arise, as I say, by a natural process of accretion of matter in the galactic limbs. And even science will explain this to you if you want to go investigate. But the Gnostic myth says that the origin of the planet Earth was special. It was an anomaly. And the anomaly was due to the fact that the Aeon Sophia, remember she was one of the designers of the human genome, became so fascinated with how this species would develop. She became so identified with it, identified with her creation and with its evolution, that she did something that aeons do not normally do. She left the galactic core. She plunged from the galactic core, and she passed out into the region of the galactic arms. And she became involved in the laws of materialization, gravity, electromagnetism, and so forth that work in the galactic arms. And as a result of her fall, this is called the fall of Sophia, or the fall of the wisdom goddess, she herself, the galactic divinity of the core, turned into the planet Earth. So what the Gnostics teach us is that we are living on a planet which is a habitat of nature consisting of oceans, mountains, the sky, rivers, the material body of the earth, and all of that is actually the materialization of a divinity or goddess from the galactic core.
Mm-hmm.
So that very goddess who designed us is present right now in this planet, is present to us. We can reach her, we can contact her, we can know that she is present, and we can communicate and interact with her. And this is an extraordinary situation. You must try to get your mind around the huge proposition that there are many other planetary laboratories in which this is not the case. So the world system that we inhabit came about due to an anomaly. So that is the Gnostic explanation of the creation of the earth, the creation of humanity, the creation of the earth. Now, finally, to round off the cosmological background, we come to the even more bizarre phenomenon, which is called in Gnostic teachings the generation of the Archons. Now, as you probably know, but others listening may not know, I introduced the word Archons into the discourse on this planet about 12 years ago, okay? Mm-hmm. And since then, it's been taken up by many, many people. And I'd like to say that it's extremely important to me, as the person who introduced it, that people recognize two things. First of all, when I introduced it, I spoke of it in the way that Gnostics taught. I didn't speculate. I didn't make up my own ideas about ETs. I didn't use the Sitchin hypothesis. I didn't talk about ETs engineering the human genome. That is not true. ETs did not engineer the human genome. The aeons at the core of the galaxy are our true cosmic parents. What I did was I followed the Gnostic intel and I reported on the Archons according to the Gnostic intel. And the second thing that I did, which unfortunately many people disregard, is that I stressed that the Gnostics taught that the Archons, or extraterrestrial parasites that prey upon humanity, came about as a result of Sophia's action, that she accidentally produced these Archons. And I can't think of anyone who uses the word Archon today who includes that important piece of information, which is very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Right. You need that whole context to really understand what the Archons are, how they came to being. And there's also an element in terms of our solar system's composition where that involves the Archons. Maybe you could discuss that a little bit.
Sure. Let's make that the last piece of the cosmological picture that we're setting here, which is the framework for the rest of our discussion. Okay?
Perfect.
Again, you really need to use your imagination. You need to think logically. You to take in this story. This is a complex scenario. This is not a simple myth. This is a complex myth. But the beauty of it, once you get into it, I think is just indisputable. The beauty and the coherence of it are tremendous. And once you get the picture operating in your mind, and you can see it, you realize that there are many things that we are told by science that verify it. So it is a verifiable myth. It is not something to be taken on faith. What the Gnostics said was that you should, I say that you should envision the fall of Sophia as a massive spike of pure stellar plasma from the galactic core. As a matter of fact, about 15 years ago, astrophysicists discovered the traces of such a spike. They discovered that there is a trail or path leading directly, a tunnel leading directly from the core of our galaxy to the area of the third arm where the solar system is located. So they, in fact, found the evidence, the smoking gun, of what the Gnostics said about Sophia's plunge. There was a massive discharge of plasma from the galactic core. This is an anomaly. It doesn't happen all the time. And at the end of that discharge, at the very end of it, where it terminated, eventually the planet Earth arose as the materialization of the body of the goddess. But there was a secondary effect of that event. Because it is not normally the case for the plasma of the galactic core to discharge into the galactic arms, the discharge, fall of Sophia in mythological terms, created an extraordinary impact in the area of material and elementary substance of the third galactic arm. You could imagine it in this way. Imagine a stream of foam like you have in a fire extinguisher. Imagine a stream of foam being shot out of a high tension hose. And imagine that this stream of foam was shot out straight down, say, into a flat area that consisted of sand. Well, that stream of foam would obviously cause an enormous disturbance in the sand. And as the foam dried and crystallized, it would take up particles of the sand in it, and it would form that sand into erratic patterns that the sand would not otherwise take had it not been subjected to this torrent of foam. That's one of the analogies you could use to picture this event. And so the first thing that happened as a result of the plasmic discharge from the galactic core was that it produced this bizarre species. It produced these insect-like cyborgs called Archons. Now, if you want to go and understand this phenomenon, you have to go investigate what is called the Acari insects, ACARI, or specifically the abiogenesis of the Acari insects. This is an experiment that was done around 1830 by a man named Andrew Cross. And in this experiment, which is widely documented in scientific literature, you can find it on the internet, Andrew Cross, C-R-O-S-S-E, Acari insects. He produced tiny insects like mites by the generation of an electromagnetic field.
Wow.
This is a fact. And I didn't know this fact when I first reconstructed the Gnostic myth and when I told the story that I just described of the generation of the Archons. And I remember very clearly when I was putting that together for Not in His Image, I thought, oh, shit. You know, this is the part of the mythology that people aren't going to buy. You know, nobody's going to buy
right.
the statement that insect-like creatures, which is what the Archons are, they're inorganic cyborgs, could spontaneously appear in outer space because of the mysterious impact of some plasmic discharge. And then, but I wrote it anyway because I trusted the Gnostic material, and then some years later, well, sure enough, I got confirmation that this is possible in this amazing phenomenon. So,
yeah. Well, I just wanted to say a reason I think that is so fascinating is because we've been talking a little bit about spider beings lately and how at Bohemian Grove, in front of the gate, it says, "Weaving spiders come not here." And in this context, it starts to make me think of like secret electromagnetic sciences. Maybe they spawn some type of spider-like creatures. Maybe that's a direct cryptic message to Archons to not come there. It's very odd, but that phrase, "weaving spiders come not here," is starting to make a little more sense as more things unravel.
Yeah, it's a mysterious phrase, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. But anyway, to cut to the chase and to conclude this background
Right.
part of our discussion, it's important to know that the people who provided us today with the intel on the Archons, and they profiled their behavior brilliantly. They described how they abduct souls by night, which you would call ET abductions.
Right.
They described their appearance as being of a neonate form, that is to say, a prematurely born fetus with a large head and big eyes and spindly limbs. All of this they described. Well, have some respect, folks, because the people who gave you that intel on the Archons also told you where the Archons originated. So don't ignore that part of the intel. They originated in the solar system before the Earth was created, before Sophia herself turned into the Earth. And they were given the task by Sophia and given the power to organize material and elementary substance into their own habitat. So they created the solar system independent of the Earth, Sun, and Moon. And that solar system that they created that belongs to the Archons is the inorganic part of our solar system. That is to say, the inorganic planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, are productions of the Archons, and they are the habitat of the Archons. The Archons primarily live, as far as I can tell, in the rings and moons of Saturn.
What I found out is these things inhabit Saturn. That's where I first discovered them, and they're proliferating. They're now Uranus and Jupiter. Wherever you see some rings now, why, that's one of these.
You see the craft.
Yeah, I call it a ringmaker. Yeah.
Okay, you call it a ringmaker.
Yeah. When I worked at Lockheed, I had documents that were indeed top secret. And then I got tapped to go behind closed doors.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And I was there for, till I got claustrophobia. I had to sign my life away for 30 years.
Wow. Is it still in effect right now?
No.
No? So could you tell me anything?
No.
You can't?
Mm-mm.
Why? What would happen?
I'd prefer not to find out.
Might have seen some craft in those hangars. Is that right?
It was my first clue that there was something in space that was different. Okay. And I found this one spot of data that really looked interesting. When I got it, you could tell it was something strange. I didn't, at that time, I have seen one on the ground in Antarctica.
You have?
Not personally, but an image of one, which I wished I had cut out. You know, these things can come in real low.
Yeah.
They're all sizes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same deal as airplanes. You know, they're Cubs and all that kind of. You know.
Right, and so when you're talking about the craft in the rings of Saturn, you're talking about something huge, right?
Yes.
Much bigger than we could even conceive of, I understand. What is it? I don't know, what was it, 70,000 square feet?
I could, in looking down on the rings, I could see parallel lines crossing the ring, all the rings at once. Mm-hmm. That's about as long as you can get them.
That's incredible.
But I could tell that those lines demarked the outside of an object.
Mm-hmm. So are you sort of saying, when you say you got claustrophobia, I don't know what that means. Do you mean that you became sort of tired of working in this above top secret area?
Yeah, no, I'm not tired, and it was very exciting. I got to see everything that went on all over the world.
Wow.
Nothing much has changed.
Yeah? Okay, but have you heard that NASA alters their footage coming from the moon, etc.?
I know some of the things they do with it, yeah.
Okay, so even their footage is not always dependable, right? Although I guess it's dependable to begin with. It's just that they start altering it later.
I have been told by a very reliable source, he says, I thought we darkened that enough that you wouldn't find it.
Oh, yes. So you were finding things that they thought they covered up.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
That must have been a lot of fun.
And this guy says, well, I suppose you want me to go out and tell everybody about that. I said, no, I don't want to embarrass you. That doesn't make any difference to me. Whatever you want to do is fine with me. I'm just saying I found what you saw. Tell you, at this juncture, I don't know what I have. I finally went to put it in a vault that the people claim nobody can get in here, including the government. But unfortunately, somehow, somebody did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And what they do, they garble it. They run it through something and they garble it.
So it's no longer...
And sometimes there's just nothing on there. And I know that there should be something, and there's nothing. So I don't know how much of the early stuff I can put together. What I do know is I can put together it any time. I know pretty much what's going on.
And this is the ring, right? This part, this is the ring?
That ends up being the ring.
Yeah.
It's
and
hot plasma.
Oh, really? Okay, so, and what your theory is they're manufacturing it, is that correct?
It comes, that's the exhaust from this thing.
From the craft?
Yes. It load a lot of energy, you know? And,
Okay, but you're saying things are getting critical because I'm really curious. Are you saying that those craft are coming here? Is that why it's critical?
well, I'm saying, in effect, if they do, and there's a good probability that that is possible, then, hey, you've got to get with it. You can't wait around. Okay? But you see, no one really in this country accepts the concept that at Saturn, those things are there.
Right.
People have got to be made to understand that those things are real.
Right. Okay, but if there are craft, there are beings.
There is the ship that picked up the Voyager capsule at Alameda Naval Shipyard, and they have a picture there of I think it's the Apollo flight that Bugs and Neil were on. But anyway, there is one image there that shows black people getting off.
So people with dark skin getting off.
Not dark, black.
Black skin.
Really black. Yeah.
Were they tall?
Yes.
Very tall?
Yeah.
How tall? Do you know?
Well, they got out the doorway. I don't know how high that is, but
Well, what?
it's safe. 7 feet would be probably a conservative estimate.
Well, I guess I'm not sure where to go from here with you, other than to ask you if you can describe any of the beings that you encountered, other than the doctor, the one that you described.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, I have so many illustrations in my book of the ones that I am not an artist, so I have to really see something in order to draw it. Sure. Probably the most unusual looking being was the praying mantis, something I call a praying mantis type being with ebony skin, kind of a Oh, maybe an exoskeleton, but when she walked, she kind of, I guess her back was at about a 45-degree angle, and she would kind of rock back and forth as her legs would move. And that was probably the most unusual type of being I saw.
Katharina, don't take offense at this. I'm going to just ask you a straight-out question. It is, how have you satisfied yourself or come to terms with this question that you're not crazy as a loon? I mean, this is wild stuff you're talking about.
And you say there's something going on now. It's becoming critical, is how you're terming it.
Yeah, it's much more prevalent than what we saw in 1985 or a little earlier.
Meaning there's more activity on Saturn, do you think, or just more activity around this question about the rings and the craft in the rings?
No, there's actual activity.
There is.
To start off with, Uranus, which is one of the other planets, did not have rings.
That's right.
But now it does.
Right.
See? And so that kind of thing is going on. And we really ought to get to the root of it.
Okay, do you have a theory on why Uranus suddenly has rings?
Well, sure, it's the exhaust. I would expect something to happen a little bit.
You would?
Yes.
When you say something to happen, what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that Stanford, let's say, well, let's look into what Norm's doing. As far as my own professional organization is concerned, it does not fit at all with their objectives.
How is it different?
It's too controversial.
As you say, there are new rings around Uranus, and there's other activity on other planets too, isn't there? In the solar system? Jupiter? And what's happening with Jupiter?
It's getting rings.
It's getting rings. Okay, and are you seeing craft there as well? Vehicles, as you call them?
I haven't identified craft, but I can tell you that where there's rings, there are these things. So
we have these ring makers,
yeah,
and they create tremendous energy.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about what you think is going on there? You've got any ideas?
I happen to been able to uncover what she saw.
Really?
Yeah.
And what did you...
I would say, I don't think they're mining the rings. I think they're nursing from the rings.
Oh, in other words, you think they're using the energy to power their craft.
Yeah, that's where new ones are getting their energy.
New vehicles are getting their energy?
Yeah. You start out small, just like a baby, and then they get bigger.
Oh, right, because you say that you believe they're sort of like alive. Do you believe they're plasma vehicles, what's called a plasma vehicle? Have you heard that terminology?
Well, I've never heard them called plasma vehicles, but I can understand why somebody might say that, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've heard that the vehicles out there they actually fly close to the sun, and they power themselves up on the sun, and then they go back in.
I wouldn't be surprised, yeah. I've noticed some go in there, and it means that they're capable of withstanding those high temperatures. Yes. And so,
true.
Yeah, they could get pumped up really nicely.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, you know that NASA has been sort of a front organization. I call them a front organization for the secret space program.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about being front.
Well, when I say front, I mean if you have an organization that deals with the public, interfaces with the public, and also misleads the public on certain things by doctoring photos, by covering up certain things, by only releasing certain things, that's a front organization, isn't it?
Okay, all right. I guess you're entitled to do that.
Okay. So if we were to look at the situation a little closer and find out who are the insider organizations, certainly Lockheed would qualify. Would you say that the defense industry are all in the know?
No.
No?
No. Lockheed only recently has been getting images themselves. And flight out to Saturn where the instrument flew by the ring. And the idea was to sense the plasma, and so it ticked, and they knew the speed, and they knew the time it took to pass the ring, and so they knew how thick it was. And now that was a plasma indicator.
Okay.
So it has been measured that indeed there is plasma rings. But you read also where, this is a bunch of broken up moons that got there, and there's confusion in their storytelling.
But the rings that are suddenly appearing around Uranus, these are not broken up moons, right?
All I can say is, the rings are there, and my interpretation is, by inference, I see the rings, so somewhere there's an EMV. And they're never where you think they're going to be. I don't think they're mining the rings. I think they're nursing from the rings. That's where new ones are getting their energy.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of the hidden history of the solar system, because I hear this talked about more and more, and it's fascinating stuff. I mean, a lot of researchers, you talked about the maybe different ET groups that have been here for a long time, and there are researchers that kind of speculate that humanity may have come from somewhere else, like even Mars. And maybe
yes, I agree.
You do?
I agree completely. Yes, I do.
Do you think that some races are indigenous to Mars and some were indigenous to Earth?
Yes, I do believe that. I believe that there was a parallel evolution, not only on Mars and Earth, but on the moon and some of the moons of Saturn. You asked me earlier, I think it was you who mentioned about the sun, that Saturn was once a sun.
Yes.
Yes. There is, the world's foremost, or one of the world's foremost experts in gravitational physics is Dr. Ed Belbruno of Princeton University. And he wrote a book called Fly Me to the Moon. And when he released it, I went to hear him speak, and there were copies of his book around, and I did a review of it. But when I opened up his book, the first page that I opened to stated that in the early history of the solar system, Saturn was a sun. Saturn was a sun, and we were a binary star system, and that it died down. It didn't really, it started up, but it didn't jumpstart to the full fusion stage, and it died down. Another theory is that Jupiter, I've heard that we were once a triple sun system in the very early, the hot, really hot period of the evolution of the solar system, that Saturn, Jupiter, and our sun, Sol, where we comprise a three-sun system. If that is true, then you can see that Jupiter and Saturn would have been mini solar systems, with little minor, they would have been minor stars and to our major star, the sun. And as I say, God only knows what he could cook up in that primordial soup with 12 moons on Jupiter and 11 moons on Saturn. One interesting thing about Saturn that I will share with you now. In 1949, Project Sign, which became Project Grudge, which became Project Blue Book, was concerned with the UFO problem and the problem of these giant motherships that had been observed taking positions in equatorial orbits around the Earth. And from these motherships, the scout ships were descending, scout ships being the smaller crafts like the ones that crashed at Roswell, the ones, plural. There were 2 UFOs that crashed at Roswell. And one landed in the Foster Ranch, and the other one landed in the plains of St. Augustine. A great book has been written by Arthur Campbell regarding the recovery of artifacts from the plains of St. Augustine. And I recommend that to everyone. It's the most profound and thoroughly scientific book that I believe I've ever read or seen on the Roswell crash. And they found pieces of high-density polyethylene, which, along with certain metal fragments, which seem to have components of otherworldly molecules. So I recommend the UFO crash on the plains of St. Augustine, or Augustine, by Arthur H. Campbell. So this Project Sign memo that I read is part of those Majestic 12 documents that you can find in Dr. Robert Wood's website. Majestic 12, I believe, is the website, majestic.com or org. Either way, the statement was this, that the United States government, the United States Air Force, Department of Defense had enlisted the top astronomers and the top astronomical observatories, to try to track the UFOs to see where these fleets of UFOs were coming from. And they did so. And they reported back to the United States Department of Defense that they had tracked these fleets, the motherships, through their powerful telescopes, and that they found that they were originating, coming from and going back to the moon Titan.
Wow.
Saturn's moon Titan.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about Titan having vast oceans. That's pretty interesting.
Vast oceans of methane. Methane.
Even weirder.
Weirder. Titan looks more like planet Earth, topographically speaking, than any other of the moons or planets that we've explored. And it has terrain and mountain ranges and continents, but the oceans are made of liquid methane, which I believe is something like 167 degrees below zero. And of course, we believe that no life can exist in such climes. But about 3 years ago, a few NASA scientists came out and said that they had found a special form of life in Mono Lake, California, which was based on arsenic. It was a cell or culture that reproduced itself, and its metabolism and its life cycle was based not on carbon, but on arsenic, of all things.
I do remember seeing that. Yeah, very odd.
Well, this and the premise of this revelation was, her name was Dr. Wolf, and she had hyphenated names, but I don't remember Dr. Wolf or Wolfson. But she said a very interesting thing. She said the important thing about their finding was that the search for life, as we have conducted it for the last 40 years, life on Mars, life on the moon, life anywhere, has been conducted through too narrow a window. We've been looking only for carbon-based life. And this showed that there is another form of life that was based on arsenic. And then she made the most amazing statement. She said, now this life form cannot thrive on Earth because the temperature is too hot. It needs all of its energy just to maintain its steady state, so it cannot expand, propagate, reproduce. It just has to keep accumulating the arsenic to maintain its steady state existence. However, on another planet where the temperature was much colder than Earth's, and she then said, perhaps on some place like Saturn's moon Titan, where the temperature is 167 below zero, it might be possible for such an organism to thrive and propagate.
Wow.
That was an earth-shattering statement. And really the important thing was pointing out that perhaps the paradigm is wrong, that our assumption that all life, any life, must be based on the carbon is a fallacy. It's an erroneous assumption.
The Gnostic cosmology, which we just went through in 45 minutes, that wasn't too bad, was it?
No, not at all.
According to them, I can make a statement to you, which I believe will eventually be confirmed by science, and science is in fact on the verge of confirming this statement. The Gnostics claimed that the planet Earth was formed anomalously, as I said, and that it does not properly belong to the solar system. They claimed that the planet Earth is a living entity, a living superorganism captured in an inorganic system. The Earth is captured in the solar system, and the solar system at large is an inorganic system. It consists of inorganic planets, which are the habitat of the Archons. So this is a remarkable statement. But this presents a problem, because the Archons they are very intrusive. It is said in one of the cosmological texts, I think it's called The Reality of the Archons, is the title of it, that they do not observe the boundaries of the place where they were put. So if they had observed their boundaries, they would simply inhabit the solar system. They would be creatures living out there. They might occasionally, be detected by human beings with paranormal faculties, but they wouldn't meddle with us. But the point is that they meddle and they mess and intrude with the human experiment.
You are in the middle of an alien invasion, and I am not in any way throwing shade on the subject, attempting to denigrate it, even though I'm now discussing it as a LARP. You can see that I'm not being humorous about this subject. I'm very, very serious. Now, I want the algos to understand that my seriousness is part of the LARP, but I want the viewers to understand that my seriousness relates to the subject matter. Okay, you are in the middle, or not, you're not even in the middle, you're involved in an alien invasion. There's many things we know about this alien invasion and that we can infer. And there's many things that seem to be implied by what is going on. It'll never be disclosure. You'll never have ascension. These are disinformation efforts by our military and other militaries who are actively involved in this alien invasion in attempting to deal with it. But this alien invasion is so far outside of their capacity, our capacity as a species to fight, that they don't have a whole lot of tools. And so it's not a war or an invasion as you might understand it. But we do have factual material that we can use for data mining to determine some things to prove my point here. And we can prove it just using absence, okay? So as somebody involved in the woo-woo world, basically I would say that your knowledge is perhaps 80 to 90% comprehensive over what's going on in the woo-woo world. So you understand things from astrology, you understand things all the way over to ancient history, the blending of the two, the impact on psychology, the ancient civilizations, all of these kind of things. You understand UFOs, they're well within your subject matter. You speak to all of these things quite frequently, but there's something you never talk about. And it's that absence that makes it important. okay, that makes it supremely important, that is the key that unlocks this vision of what's going on between the global technical militaries against this alien threat that is ongoing right now and has been going on for a number of years. And that absence is abductions. You don't have abductees on your show. You don't talk to abductees. You don't have references in the literature to abductees. It is almost as though you are a victim of a mind control that says, shh, don't talk about that. The characteristic that is very intriguing about abductions once we drill into it. It's multi-generational, okay? And the people involved don't talk about it. This is a situation where just think to yourself, the amount of abduction information that's actually going through our airwaves in the woo-woo world is minuscule compared to the sheer number of people that are reporting personally the abductions of themselves, family members, the influences, etc. If it was proportionate, we should find that 80 to 90% of all the woo-woo programs, 80 to 90% of your show, 80 to 90% of Leak Prod, or of any of these other YouTube channels that are related to the woo-woo world should be constantly talking about abductions because there's so many, okay? It can be estimated that there are over 1 million abductions within the United States alone every year. And this is a pan-global phenomenon. And we're not particularly attractive to the aliens. And so there's not a lot of, proportionately, there's not a lot of North Americanos that are getting abducted. Okay, there's a lot more being abducted in the Southern Hemisphere in a proportion to the population. You can find the information if you start looking for it in non-English reports. Many of these abductees in foreign areas will now, because it's becoming available, will actually report their symptoms, let's call it, on forums and online areas. These are difficult to hunt because they're usually done in a native language, and you know the various hunting for how things search lays out in like Pali or Malaysian or any of the number of languages in the Philippines or Chinese. It has a tendency to make it difficult for English speakers to actually do searches on those. But we can actually look from current, ongoing, hitting the internet daily kind of reports that there's millions of abductions going on globally. These abductions also follow a very specific pattern across cultures. And the same pattern is repeated, even though the language that is used to describe it is also repeated, even if that language has to be transliterated, you find out that the connotations of these things are very similar. And so that the same, a guy being abducted in northern Kashmir will have very much the same kind of similar experience as a guy being abducted in Colorado, okay, from the gray aliens and all of this kind of thing. And these abductions have been going on for a long period of time. And a common thread within these abduction stories is what happens to the abductees while they're under the care of the space aliens. These aliens have been, according to the abductees, have been hybridizing abductees for decades now. And it may have been going on for thousands of years. It gives one pause to wonder what happened to Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, Australopithecus, all these other hominids. What happened to them? We should not have displaced Neanderthal. At the time that Neanderthal dominated Europe, humans were hardly a presence. And we could interbreed with them and this kind of thing, but they were an entirely different species than us. And they disappeared as though literally lifted off the planet and taken away. I think the US military is aware of this space alien invasion. And I think they're putting out all kinds of disinformation anytime it gets close to reality, such that people won't take it seriously. I also think that the space aliens themselves are doing things to try and dampen our natural curiosity into their activities such that it doesn't get overblown and that we don't really tumble to this, and that they're actually doing things within our minds, individually and collectively, to keep us from discussing the subject of abductees, to keep us from taking it seriously. Both sides are attempting to do this because it doesn't bode well for our side, for all of us to really react and run around screaming like the Martians are here, right? Because we don't have that music yet. We don't yet know what it is that's going to make their heads explode. I think I've got a few ideas, and I've been thinking about this for some time now. I've got many sources for this, so let's get into some of that, okay? First off, as I pointed out, we have the evidence of absence. Nobody talks about abductions, yet there's millions going on every year. And these millions always have this consistent pattern. And it doesn't matter who the investigators are. And it doesn't matter what language the investigators operate in. So I've got a book here by David Jacobs. And he wrote a book on the alien plan to control humanity. And I think he's probably fairly accurate about what he's saying, because I find that there's Spanish researchers writing about this in great detail. Very much the same language, very much duplicating what U.S. abductees are saying, or it's being replicated in abductees from Latin America and from Africa. We also see the similar concepts from the abductees that report this in Russia. And in Russia and China, the abductees are talking a little bit more. The space aliens can control our minds. They can actually control the neural pathways in our brains, and they can do so such that they could eliminate me from your vision. I could be sitting there, I could be coughing and hacking, and they decide what you will hear and see of my presence. And they can do this relatively easily. Okay, so they are able to control our brains through their inbuilt telepathic abilities. They're putting some of these telepathic abilities into the hybrids, and they put some telepathic abilities into the next generation, which we could call the, I guess that would be the haploids, okay, the hybridized hybrids. They're closer to human. So those ones are the ones that are attempting to inject into our society. Those ones have less telepathic ability than their progenitors, and far less than the actual space aliens. These space aliens control our neuropathy through the what we might think of as the ability to feel electrical fields. Okay, these space aliens are not hominids. The space aliens create hominid-like biological robots, the Greys, reptilians even, to serve their needs. The reptilians, though, are a waning species. It's not like the Project Camelot guys. It's not like any of these whistleblowers that have provided names to them and say they come from Draconis or any of this. All of that is totally bogus. In our LARP, the reptilians were an offshoot that the space aliens did, because the reptilians are extremely easy to control mentally. The reason they're easy to control mentally is because they have a very nascent, very primitive vagus nervous system. It is my conclusion that the more advanced your vagus nervous system, the less ability you have for mind control, as the space aliens are doing it now. These people that are being infiltrated into our society are going to be used to control us. I know that. I know that that is going to be one of the goals. How long that control lasts is another issue. These people that are being brought into this society may be here to replace us. Okay, so no humans might be here 200 years from now, the same way that it took less than 200 years for Neanderthal to go. Within our LARP, let's understand that imagining oneself in a situation where there's an alien invasion and the aliens use mind control as a huge part of as in fact their only primary weapon, then one must, in my opinion, be very disciplined with their own thoughts when thinking about this, and not allow dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine to cause your thoughts to go off into an area where you would make assumptions that can't be proven. And if you're going into an area where you can't make anything, make proven statements out of it, then best leave it alone, because we don't have the time for diversions. That's why I'm really pissed, even more so now than I was in the past, about some of the people within the woo-woo society, within the woo-woo community, because they're leading us in areas, then they're sucking the air out of the room, etc. And we don't need that now. We need the ability to think clearly and very hard-headed and creative about our situation. Or Rex won't necessarily be here 50 years from now to retire, because he will simply have been eliminated, and he won't be needed anymore, because the invasion will have progressed a great deal. Now, this invasion may have been going on for the last 80 years. If they're doing 1 million a year in abductions, and these abductees are only being abducted to train the infiltrators, and the abductees are being replaced back in the society each and every night, and only being used to train infiltrators, as I say, then how many infiltrators per year can 1 million people train in the United States? And here's some of the weird things about this, okay? You get individuals like Corey Good saying, oh, there's millions of abductions a year, and most of them never come back. Well, that's a bogus statement, right? Okay, and it also is a diverting statement, because from that point on, you as the listener are not going to think appropriately about the abductions. You're going to go off on, well, he's full of it, blah, 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 right? And so you're not going to think about appropriately about the abduction phenomenon that is actually occurring right now. And all of the common thread, the hugest common thread of the whole thing, is that these abductees are training infiltrators. They're training quasi-humans, the third generation humanoid hybrids, to infiltrate and live in our society.
I want to ask a question on that, because I've been doing a lot of research into the electric universe theory lately, and I've been going out to the Four Corners areas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, seeing many of these petroglyphs. And in Sankawi, there are these petroglyphs of ant beings. They look like people with antennas. They're the big ones. And then the one in particular, it's almost like when you get into this area, you've got all these petroglyphs that are on the cliff walls, where it's like they're telling you a story, and there's all these caverns that are going inside and such. But my favorite one there is this petroglyph that you've got a big ant-man, and then you've got a human next to the ant-man, and then you've got a little ant toddler dude. And they're all like, hi, they're waving and they're pointing up. They're like, hey, look up here. So I was talking to Diamond about this, and I was like, do you think that, and he was like, maybe they show up at specific times when there's these great cataclysms that take place, and maybe they come down to help humanity. You have a different theory on it. The ant people even? I mean, do you think there's
No, I agree with you right there, okay? Because here's something that's going to blow your socks off. The beings at the top of the alien abduction are insects. They're what we call mantids. If you were to try and do a petroglyph of them, what do you think that might look like?
Look like an ant bean.
Correct. These things are not here to help us. Humanity is not going to be aided by these beings. The situation that I can see now strategically is that these insectalins, as Jacob calls them, have been around and involved with us for at least the last 1,000 years, if not longer. They may have been involved with us for perhaps millions of years, and they may have been involved to the point of getting, Cro-Magnon to die off, that kind of thing. However, all of that is speculation. I just don't know. But I do know they've been involved with us for the last 1,000 years or longer, because who knows when those petroglyphs were chiseled, right? But here's the thing about this. They're in charge. They are an insect. They acknowledge that they are insects, and insects have no vagus nervous system. None. They won't have emotions as you and I understand them. They don't have anything that makes us human, which is basically our vagus nervous system and its use as a hormonal antenna, if you will. Okay. So now we need to talk about the insects and get into this. Okay, so the insects that we're dealing with are, we can talk about them as though they're mantids, because they look more like a praying mantis, in my opinion, than they do like an ant being. But if you're going to chisel them two-dimensionally in a rock, it'll look the same either way. A being with a couple of antennae, a reasonably pointed head, and sort of an elongated body with the arms out in front. Okay, these beings cannot be judged by ourselves. So if you say the word help, aid, any of these kind of words that relate to a human emotion, you can be sure they won't have it. They won't have that emotion. They won't understand it. These beings could care less if you had every bone in your body broken and were lying there in a giant heap of pain. If it served them, they would turn the pain off in your head because it jangles them. It makes you more difficult to control. That pain swamps your available mind channels, and so they can't get their field correct to make you do what you want. So if it served them, they would shut your pain off. But they would then, if you had 2 broken legs, they would then force you to stand up and walk on those 2 broken legs, in spite of all of the problems it's going to cause further on, because you are of no consequence to them, because they don't have an emotion that they can attach to anything outside themselves. We can, and this is a common characteristic that you find in the abductees reporting about dealing with the hybrids. Abductees will do things quite human, okay? The abductees will do things like attach emotions to people, objects, sentiment about a particular thing your mother gave you, or, oh, I got this hat signed by Rex, that kind of thing, right? So I have an emotion attached to it, that kind of a deal, right? They can't do that. They can't empathize with that. They have no concept of that. The hybrids are not able to attach emotions outside of their own immediate sphere of their being. The insects, not at all. They can't even do it outside of their own agenda because they don't have a vagus nervous system. They may be very long-lived, they may be greatly intelligent in some specific ways, but they're abysmally ignorant about a whole lot of stuff. And their view of what our society should be is not good for humans. They don't have hormones. They can't deal with hormones. They are right now trying to breed their hybrids to have a balance of their kind of telepathy and enough hormones that they can interact with us. Okay, but too much hormones, and then the hybrids can have episodes of uncontrollability. All right, and there's all different kinds of stuff to way deep going down into the insects and the hybrids and so on. But the insects and the ant people, they were not to help. So someone was recording the insects, the hierarchy, insect greater than the human, higher, taller, more powerful. And they were probably recording the clones that the insects used to do the dirty work, because they cloned the reptiles, they cloned the little grays, the big grays, et al. So Sims is quite correct. All of these beings are clones. There's not thousands of species out there the way that, Corey Good and these other guys would have you believe. There's no space slave trade going on. The millions of abductees are taken away every night and returned the next day because the invasion doesn't want us to know that we're being invaded. And so they got to return these, and then they're going to wipe their minds. Now, they will do things like, threaten. They've got their own security force to protect their implants into our society, and it gets really complicated from this point forward. And there's dozens and dozens of ways to think about this and certain things to get involved with here. However, in a context, so that's part of our LARP, is that we have real world evidence that this is going on. We can read abduction tales online in near real time. They write them up this morning about being abducted last night. You can read them in Filipino, you can read them in Arabic, you can read them in Swahili, as far as I know. They're just out there everywhere in all the different languages. It's cross-cultural. They're all doing the same things. And apparently we're being invaded in a big way at this point. Now, all of the abductees report that on top of this whole mess of the invasion are the insects. They're extremely cold. There's no emotion in them. They have what we might think of as like satisfaction when things are working their way and dissatisfaction when they're not. They're extremely ruthless and brutal. They have no real gender. So it's not like mantids down here that you're likely to meet. They're all female, right? Because the males live very briefly just to impregnate the females and then are destroyed. These mantids that you run into are neither gender. So they mustn't reproduce in some way that does not involve that, because they don't exude any kind of a gender thing. It's helpful to think of them as being male simply because it provides a context or framework for their perceived brutality and callousness, okay? Because they are, from our perspective, quite brutal and callous. They simply don't care about your pain. You can lie there and be in pain until you die, and they would not in any way move themselves unless it was to their gain. And so that's the kind of thing that motivates them. They don't have what we would think of as an idiosyncratic motivation that we now know arises from our vagus system as our hormonal balance changes. It causes us to be motivated to do things. They don't operate that way. So it's very much a strange interaction dealing with those guys.
The Mash project.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to the talk, which is by Dr. Young-hae Chi, who is at one of England's leading universities as a lecturer in, is it Oriental Studies, at the Department of Oriental Studies? Yeah. He's from South Korea and has had a very long-term interest in the UFO subject and has done a lot of research. And I was very surprised when he contacted us about his subject matter, particularly his ideas on the escalation of alien abduction with the increase in environmental chaos and catastrophe and what have you, crisis. So I was very interested to hear how he might draw those two elements or subjects together, because, of course, the environment is extremely important. So I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Young-hae Chi and welcome him as a first-time speaker also to MASH. So we're very grateful for all the work that all you presenters have done. Thank you. So handing over. Thank you.
Well, nice to see you all. Can you hear me clearly? Let me start with talking about Dr. David Jacobs, who is an abduction researcher in the United States. He made two arguments, very important arguments, in relation to alien abduction. The first one is the primary purpose of abduction is to produce hybrids, human-alien hybrids. And the second one is the primary purpose of this hybrid project is to colonize the Earth. He bases the second argument on two observations. The first one is the mass production of the second generation hybrids. Aliens produce hybrids not only between themselves and humans, but also between these alien human hybrids and humans. And these second generation hybrids, you can call them or whatever, three-quarter hybrids. These second generation hybrids look quite similar to humans, and it is quite difficult to distinguish them from ordinary humans, even if they are mixed together with us. The second observation is that some of the second generation hybrids behave quite nastily. So they are likely to be fitting for some nasty purpose. They are actually walking, according to David Jacobs, among us without being noticed, and they are carrying out very sinister, clandestine mission. And he defines this mission as colonization of the Earth. I happily accept the first argument. The abduction is primarily for producing, and many or the majority of abduction stories entail a stage of genetic manipulation or hybrid production in one way or another. Abductees have their ovum or sperm routinely extracted, and they are also often involved in sexually oriented actions with aliens or even with other human abductees on board under the influence of mind control by aliens. Reports of glass containers full of hybrid fetus or the encounter with hybrid toddlers on board is a very common feature of abduction stories. Particularly female abductees frequently find themselves with unusual symptoms of pregnancy and often find their fetus stolen without knowing exactly when it happened, how it happened, and why it happened. All these aspects sufficiently justify the argument that aliens are really intent on producing hybrids for whatever the reason might be. However, the second argument is less convincing, because I cannot shake off the feeling that his judgment is based on overtly anthropocentric value judgment. When in human history a superior civilization met an inferior one, the usual outcome has been domination and subjugation. Yes, he's right. The typical example is the extermination of the Aztec civilization by Spanish conquerors in the 16th century. But can we really apply experiences from human history to an interstellar or interdimensional experience? If colonization is what aliens are really intending to do, then I think they are doing it at quite a wrong time. Because now humans have more advanced scientific knowledge and more sophisticated technology. And also, human race also have a more centralized political organization worldwide. So we have now a little bit of ability to organize a united front to resist any intervention from outside, although resistance may not be fully effectual yet. So they could have done that, or they should have done that much earlier when humans were much more docile, ignorant, and naive. So I believe if they really wanted to colonize the Earth, they should have started the hybrid project much earlier, many, many centuries earlier. This recent alien intervention in human history requires, therefore, an alternative explanation. Let me explain this alternative account by putting the alien visitation against the wider time frame of human history. In order for extraterrestrial civilizations to be able to reach us, their civilization must have evolved for many, many hundreds of years, or many thousands, or even many millions of years. This means that they would have discovered us a long time ago. The probability that we were found by them just in the 19th century or 20th century is almost nil. This requires us to look at the phenomenon of abductions from a quite different angle, because they could have visited us long before modern time, and since they would have had the power to abduct us at any time at their will, the abduction would have been a routine feature of those past visitations. And bear in mind that normally abduction incident is a very special occasion, very often involving personal traumatic experiences and memories. So if it happened habitually in the past, those who had these traumatic experiences must have left some record behind, either in writing or in stories. But we don't have such records left in the pre-modern period. Even in modern times, the pre-Second World War encounters usually involve visual sightings rather than physical abduction. And so I believe the phenomenon of abduction belongs almost exclusively to the post-Second World War period. Just as abduction is a novel phenomenon to us, so is the hybrid project. There are a few records of contact with aliens in the pre-1945 period, but we rarely hear that human-alien encounters involved any forms of genetic engineering. So we can say that although alien visitation predates the 20th century, the phenomenon of abduction and the hybrid project largely belongs to the post-Second World War period. Why did aliens, we can ask, embark on abduction and hybrid project only in the latter half of the 20th century? What I suggest here is that they started it as a response to the rapidly aggravating environmental condition of this planet. The screen you are seeing there shows the changes in the level of atmospheric concentration of the three main culprits of global warming, which is carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. These GHGs, greenhouse gases, have increased markedly as a result of human activities since 1950, and now they far exceed the pre-industrial values determined from ice core. If you expand the time scale back into the last 150 years, then you will see the long-term trend more clearly. This is a zoomed-in graph of the change in carbon dioxide, which is the main culprit for global warming. Like other two GHGs, the CO2 concentration level had been more or less stable for the last 10,000 years, until the start of the industrial age around in 1750. However, since the time, 1750, the level has went up, as you see here, not incrementally, not even exponentially, but almost vertically. The IPCC report makes a conclusive judgment about the trend and the cause of global warming. It says, warming of the climate system is unequivocal, and most of the observed increase in global average temperatures since the mid-20th century is very likely due to the observed increase in anthropogenic GHG concentrations. Of particular significance in relation to alien visitation are the graphs you see in the inlets. You see here the radical increase of CO2 emission from 1950 onward, and this, if the line indicates, for example, kind of stock price change, then perhaps 1950 is the best time to enter the market. But if that indicates something ominous, perhaps there's the time you have to come out. Likewise, if non-human species were watching humans with serious concerns about the survivability of human civilization, then the time around 1950 would have been a very decisive moment for a kind of action, either intervene or give up or do something about it. So the mid-20th century truly stands as a historic point from the perspective of planet's ecological condition. And this is exactly the time when alien intervention in human affairs began in an unprecedented scale. People started to report UFO sightings around the world from this time on. Again, this is the time when we began to hear about abductions of humans by aliens. Obviously, the most famous one is the first one of this kind is the case of Antonio Villas-Boas in 1957, which was soon to follow by the case of Betty and Barney Hill case, 1961. As we see in these two early cases, the element of sexual contact and genetic engineering were prominently featured from the very beginning of abduction history. What it suggests is that, on the one hand, aliens were watching us drifting towards a kind of environmental catastrophe, and on the other hand, they began to massively interfere with human affairs. The timing may look just accidental, but given that aliens massively turned up only from 1950s, although they could have done that much earlier, centuries earlier, if they had wished to do so, it is statistically implausible to suppose that the two developments are just a mere chance event. So it is more rational, I believe, to assume that there is a certain kind of a necessary relationship between the alien visitation and the environmental crisis. James Hansen, who is NASA scientist, points out that The surface temperature captured to the present level is a result of hard work by the Earth's cooling agents. Rivers, lakes, glaciers, oceans, and Arctic and Antarctic ices, they all absorb heat from the air and emit it slowly at later stages, thus mitigating the effects of surface temperature rise. But these cooling effects should not be left working too hard and for too long time. In the end, they will vomit out the heat that they have observed so far and thereby accelerates the rise of the surface temperature. So there is a threshold, there must be one. And beyond this point, their capacity to absorb heat can no longer support the optimum condition of human existence. We call this point a tipping point. Once the system exceeds this tipping point, the global warming turns into an unstoppable process. The question is, where is this tipping point? Hansen's calculation points to 450 ppm as the most likely candidate. ppm here stands for parts per million, referring to the level of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent atmospheric concentration. Only within this boundary, Hansen argues, the world would be able to hold the surface temperature in the safe zone. I will show the present global concentration level. As of July 2012, if you look at co2now.org, you will see the present level of CO2 concentration level. So until we hit the point, how many years do we have left? It is very simple arithmetic. There has been 2 ppm increase every year for the last several decades. So supposing that we manage to keep the increase rate at the present level, then we have 27 years, 9 months before we hit the tipping point. If we fail to hold the increase rate at the present 2 ppm level, then obviously the time left will be much shorter than 27 years, 9 months, which means the surface temperature will reach the tipping point long before 2040. In the absence of an effective international regime to fight GHG emission, which is most likely to be the case in my view, there will be no way to make the concentration level peak within the limit of 450 ppm before 2040. Yet, even the threat of a rapidly approaching tipping point is dwarfed by even greater threat. This is the potential danger of permafrost. We have very strong evidence that the point of no return can arrive much earlier than 2040. The release of methane can lead to a chain reaction in which the warming temperature causes more permafrost to melt, and so more gas to be released. And this causes a spiraling increase in global warming. Once this happens, and there's nothing we can do about it. This is why climatologists call permafrost an environmental time bomb. Most climatologists agree that the world is passing through a very critical moment, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury has warned us of environmental doomsday. But it's not only scientists and theologians, but also non-human species who appear to be greatly concerned about the survivability of human species. Let me go back to the question of abduction and ask, to what extent does the abduction phenomenon entail environmental element? I looked at a number of abduction cases which had implications for environmental crisis, and according to the degree of its relevance, I have categorized them into 2 types. 1, the observer communicative type, and 2, the participatory instructive type. Let me explain the main features of these 2 types. The first one is the observer communicative type. This one involves communication about the present or future condition of the planet And the main purpose on the part of aliens appears to be to communicate about impending critical condition of the Earth, and yet without specifically mentioning what the danger involves, what causes it, or what to do about it. Abductees are shown various images of the Earth in holograms or on flat screen monitors. They see trees lay fallen on barren lands, forests are totally devastated, bodies of animals and humans are strewn about, or strange chemical and industrial materials cover the Earth's surface. Just to show one example, let me play a video clip of an Amashi experiencer, Kayali.
I know there were two standing behind me. I could feel one here and one here. And they felt quite tall. They didn't feel small. I could feel the presence. I could feel them. And they were probably a foot or two taller than me. And when I was in this place, it was all white. All I could see, for as far as my eyes could see, were little plants, all in little pots. Millions of them, rows and rows and rows of plants going on for, as far as I could see, into the distance. So I don't know how big this place was, or
were they all kinds of different plants?
No, they're all exactly the same.
Oh,
all
right.
all about a foot high, all exactly the same. And as I was looking down, I did see there were some little beings, but they weren't people or anything, or they're tiny little things like this, like not much bigger than the plants, but really thin and like those tiny little
like
monkeys.
18 inches or 2 feet tall, perhaps.
Well. Yeah,
what's that? Is it about 2 foot? Yeah.
Well, they just looked dark, and I couldn't see features. They were just sort of shadows mainly, because they were quite far away. I just saw them. They were small. And I just heard a voice in my head. And I know it was the one on this side that spoke. And it was a man's voice in English, I remember. And he just said, you can ask 2 questions. So, of course, I said, well, what's with all these plants here and what's going on? And the answer was, these are for the new planet Earth. And that was all, nothing else. These are for the new planet Earth. And next of all, I remember we carried on walking. I don't even remember if I was walking, because I don't remember a floor. I don't know if I was floating. But I remember, I wasn't in my right mind, because I know I would have asked a lot more questions or looked around. But it was either I was totally at ease and didn't need to ask, because I already knew, or they have you under some sort of control that you can't actually ask. I think probably that's.
So did you find yourself going down by these plants, or did you go elsewhere in the ship?
We just carried on walking, and we walked this way, and the plants were sort of going that way, but I didn't, as I was walking down, we didn't pass the plants, so I assumed we went another direction. But it looked the same. It was still all white and still looked the same.
When they said to you about the new Earth, did that seem kind of normal?
It seemed very normal to me. I said, oh, okay, that kind of, not like, well,
as if you already had information.
Yeah, as if I already knew, and it was totally acceptable, it's for the new Earth, and, okay, because I know in my right mind I would have said, well, what's the new Earth? Tell me more information. I want to know. And I would have really asked, but you don't, you can't do that.
No, it didn't occur to you.
You can't. Well, it's not that it doesn't occur to you. You can't.
All right.
It's like you can't speak. Basically, you can't interact the way you would normally on a realistic level like this. So either they have you under some sort of trance or hypnosis, or you don't need to ask because you already know everything, and it's So they're the 2 options I'm left with. So I don't know.
And what about the second question?
Second question, we carried on, and I just remember then there was people everywhere, but people they weren't like the rows of plants, they were in rows, long ways, like this. And I don't know how far they went up, I didn't look, but I just remember the people next to me, in front of me.
Yes.
And I have their faces embedded in my mind. I can describe what they were wearing even.
Again, would you call them human?
Yeah, they were just like us. They were normal people. They were normal people, all wearing different clothes. Some were wearing, long nighty kind of things. Maybe they were abductees, I don't know, but they were definitely humans. And none of them were talking. It was completely silent. And they seemed to be just all standing there, looking straight ahead. And as I came up closer to this, I remember the one lady, She had long hair and a long white sort of gown to probably about here. So I remember her distinctly because I was right next to her. And as I came up behind her, I saw she was looking at a screen.
Uh-huh.
This screen was just, I mean, it wasn't attached to anything, and you couldn't see it from different angles. I could see it.
So were there lots of little
they
screens?
were all, yeah, they were all
individual
They were all
screens?
looking at screens.
All individual ones?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Tiny,
Wow.
like probably...
Like on Virgin Atlantic?
Maybe, yeah, like a 14-inch, but they weren't even physical things because you couldn't see them from up there, and I couldn't see them
Almost
from...
like a holographic...
Could it be like a hologram, yeah? Could you see it? And I looked at the screen over this lady's shoulder, and the image, they were all being shown images. I don't know if they were all the same, but the one I saw was just beautiful pictures of the earth, you know, the sea, fish jumping up, and lovely mountains and things like that. And it just sort of, like a black, just went across the screen, and it changed to just a horrible, horrible, horrible sight. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was like this black, gungy stuff had come up out of the ground, and it wasn't like
like oil, or
it was like
an oil,
but like quicksand as well in a way, and horrible stuff. And it covered, like, everything was covered in it, and it covered even the sea. It was like the fish, everything was dead. I could see all dead things. I could see legs sticking up out of this thing, like hooves, you know, like some animals with hooves.
Kind of black fluidic intelligent energy?
No, it was actual physical. It was like the earth had
like
been.
The movie The Blob?
No, this was it was like you know when you get a volcano and it just covers everything and it's all like flowing and everywhere.
So it was just,
but it was black.
The earth was being consumed.
It was coming up. Yeah, it was coming up.
Like crude oil.
Yeah, it was coming up out of the earth, and it seemed to have killed everything, as far as I could see.
Was this a dream or the abduction?
No, this was on what I saw on the ship. What these people were looking at the screen.
So this was the small screen that this lady
Were
who's
there black entities, tendrilic life forms, anything that lived, or sea creature type stuff?
No, I didn't see anything like that. It just looked like there was horrible black sludge that had killed everything on Earth. All the plants were dead, and animals were dead, and fish were dead, and so it was like it was just everything went grey and black, and all the beauty was gone. You know, the sun was gone, and the trees were gone, and things like that. It was just horrible.
Did that
Like
devastated?
the film Yellow Submarine, where the blue meanies, the blue essence comes and destroys everything. No?
I don't know, I didn't see that. I didn't see it coming. It was already there, but it was like, you know,
bubbling up,
and it seemed to be coming out of the earth, and it covered everything that I could see in front of me.
And was there anything else after that you saw on the screen that you remember?
Well, that's all I remember seeing, and then I heard the voice saying, "You can ask your second question," and I said, "Well, what's happening with all these people? What are they doing here?" And the answer was, "They're being categorized," and that's all it said. They're being categorized.
What are aliens doing here? One feature that stands out is educating abductees about the damages done to the Earth. The image of the damage to the Earth is shown not only to individuals, but also to a group of people, sometimes to a group of hundreds, many hundreds, in a setting of large visual, something like a computer workshop. The other feature is that aliens are doing this without instructive messages, specifically related to the images being shown. They just let the abductees see the image and leave what to make out of it just to the abductees themselves. The second type, there are some more things to talk about type 1, but I'll just skip over to second type, which is the participatory instructive type. Here, aliens specifically direct the abductees' attention to environmental problems. They mention clearly a possible catastrophe or directly involve the abductees in the process of educating others. One of the most important cases belonging to this category is the incident at Ariel Primary School in the village of Ruwa in Zimbabwe. I'm sure you have seen this is a very famous case, so many of you have already seen this video clip. On 15 or 14 September 1994, 62 children of this school saw an alien spaceship landing near to their school ground. 2 aliens were seen standing on the spaceship or hovering above it, and one of the children got a kind of telepathic message from the aliens. And this is from John Mack's interview with the girl, and I'll just shortly play it here, about 2 minutes.
The noise that we heard in the air.
You heard a noise in the air? What was it like? Like a roar or a buzz or a hum, or what kind of a noise?
It was like someone was blowing a flute. A little object hovering. It was quite big actually, and then there was little ones all around it. We saw something silver, and then we quickly ran to the logs, and we saw a silver thing, and we saw a man standing next to it.
What was it feel like when he was looking at you?
I felt scared.
It felt scary? What was scary about it?
Well, I felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before.
Did you see the eyes? What did they look like?
They were going like that. No, more circular. And this was all black in here.
All black. Now you made pupils. Did they actually have pupils or
like
black?
White.
What?
The pupils were white like that.
You saw white in the center?
Yes, like that. They were telling us the world's going to end.
Why do you think they might want us to be scared?
Because we don't look after the planet the area properly.
And Lily, is this an idea that you have had before, that we don't look after the planet properly in the air, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience. It was like in the world, all the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
And those thoughts came to you, had you had those thoughts before this experience?
No.
No. And how did those thoughts come to you? Did they come to you from the craft or from...
From the man.
The man. And did the man say those things to you? How did he get that across to you?
Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes.
What was the sense you got from those eyes?
He was interested.
The girl here is saying maybe the world is going to end because we don't look after the planet and the air properly. All the trees go down and there will be no air. People will be dying. I tend to take this incident rather seriously. The reported incident has the least element of a hoax, and the aliens do not seem to have any ulterior motive in turning up to the school children and communicating to them. The message is quite clear, without anything cryptic or symbolic codified in. Literally is about the impending collapse of the Earth's ecological system. And what scientists did in many pages of numbers and diagrams, the aliens did in a few words. Basically, they're saying your race, together with other life forms, could perish with the evaporation of breathable air as a result of your carelessness. I said abductions belong to either category 1 or category 2, depending on the degree that the way that aliens convey environmentally significant messages. But what about the cases which appear to harbor no environmentally significant elements? These cases carry all the marks typical to alien abduction, and yet devoid of any ecologically significant episodes. And since this category constitutes another big portion of abduction reports, perhaps some might argue that environmental crisis is not really on aliens' agenda. But there is a caveat in saying this, however. It is highly possible that some talks about the physical condition of the planet occurred during abduction, but only the memory was lost. This could be either due to deliberate suppression of the memory by aliens, or perhaps the abductee's inability to overcome traumatic experience and the consequent suppression of the whole abduction process. In fact, some abductees recall ecologically significant episodes at a much later stage in their life. In addition, even if they don't have any conscious memory, many abductees subsequently become acutely interested in environmental issues, and sometimes they actively participate in environmental protection movements. So undoubtedly it is in the first and second categories cases that aliens show more environmental specific concerns, and yet we cannot exclude the possibility that even the cases apparently without any direct relevance could in fact entail environmental elements.
This is drawn by a little child who had had apparently abduction experiences, and he made this drawing for his mother, which showed, as he explained to his mother, he was quite young, as you can see by the drawing, it showed a figure with a very big eye. That was his, as if he's drawing a profile, big head and huge eye. And on the table was another little child who he knew from the neighborhood. They remembered this little boy. And they were putting something in the child's eye socket. It's very interesting to me when you get a kind of congruity between an adult description of the apparatus and a child coming up with this. He was intensely frightened by this, and frightened, his mother said he was extremely frightened for a long, long time about his eyes because of what he had seen. Now, in terms of the basic abduction implant situation, one of the things that I find extremely important is that we have implants which seem to be put in place inside the skull. There's no possibility that something got into the hand or the arm or the leg or the foot or something like that by accident. That's out. This is inside the skull. In this particular case, what you can see towards the top on the left is a small metallic object. I've had these x-rays looked at by a friend of mine who's a neurosurgeon. The story behind this is that a couple were in Italy. The father was in the army stationed in Wiesbaden, Germany, and his wife and little girl had all reported very strange experiences. And the little girl was afraid to sleep in a room at night and talked about monsters coming in through the window and one thing and another. There were various little symptoms that were noticeable that suggested she may have had some kind of experience. At any rate, they went to Italy on this little trip, and the little girl had an accident on her bicycle and fell off the bike and banged her head, was taken to the hospital emergency room, and when the x-ray was done to see if she had any kind of a skull fracture, they noticed this little object. Now, the x-rays are taken one from the top down, one from underneath, and one from the side. So you've seen one of the x-rays. This one, instead of coming down like this, is coming up like this. The object you can see is in the eye socket, just under the eye on the left side. So you can locate where it is laterally, at least. Now, the side view shows it very clearly. And the neurosurgeon said to me, these three-dimensional shots can place this thing directly. And he said to me, "Bud, this is a piece of metal in there of some sort. How did it get there?" And what was most interesting is the emergency room people in Italy, I think this might have even been Milan, were extremely curious about this. When the little girl was taken back to her home, temporary home in Wiesbaden, Germany, she was re-x-rayed and there was nothing there. Now, one thing we know is that this has happened again and again. The x-ray shows something present, and then it's not there anymore.
It's gone on as an abductee myself for all my life. I had no memory of it till I had a crisis abduction in '94. And this crisis abduction took me down a timeline, and I'm seeing a small child going into a field, and the camera pans in, and it's me. She's looking at a white disc about 50 feet across on the ground, got no idea what it is. Then suddenly a creature appears. It reminded me of a tortoise. This thing is very strong and it's scaly skinned, and it drags me right across underneath the disc into this tube. It's black in there, you cannot see a thing. You can feel this feeling of rising up, and next thing you know, you're in a round chamber. Then they start ripping my clothes off. They take this instrument and they start digging from my feet into my legs. I have the scar today, you know, still. I don't know how many times I've been abducted. There's been so many I can't count.
When was the last time you were abducted?
Well, all of a sudden I heard I could see a column of light, and inside that were 3 of the little grey aliens, 3'6". But I was up and out of this chair and up those stairs before you could say any more. Their time is not like our time. They can stretch time because they're interdimensional, and that's how they take us interdimensionally. Your home is not your castle. They set a portal up, you see. They can come through the wall, they can do whatever they bloody well want, and there's nothing you can do about it. What they want from a young female, as soon as she's able to produce eggs, that's what they want. And that's why they take you. They've been doing a breeding thing for many, many, many years. They extract through the navel because they have to put this thing through there, whip that egg out and so on. And the same with men. You know, they want the sperm, then they sort of experiment on you and all sorts of things. You see, what they want is you to mother these half-human hybrid babies. The hybrids are now here, definitely, and amongst us.
If the hybrid project is integral and central to abduction cases, then, well, as David Jacobs and Hopkins argue, and I agree with them, there must be also positive relationship between hybrid project and environmental crisis. It may be more or less assumed that the hybrid project is a response to this impending demise of human civilization. What we do not know at this stage is precisely how the project is a response to this crisis. Or perhaps aliens will never tell us and will never know about it. What they have said so far are only 3 short sentences. This is important. We must do it. We have the right to do so. The last scenario is aliens are producing hybrids as a new species that will repopulate the Earth, but only after the Earth is left deserted for a certain period of time. The hybrids will be brought down to the Earth again when the Earth ecosystem regains ability to support advanced life again. And this scenario improves on the drawbacks of the previous 2 scenarios. But it is not without its own weakness. According to James Hansen, again, it takes 10 years for atmospheric methane to turn into CO2, and about 1/3 of carbon dioxide emission remains in the atmosphere after 100 years. And 1/4 still remain after 500 years. So therefore, it will take several hundred years or even several thousand years until the Earth's ecosystem becomes clean again after the extinction of advanced life forms. But do the hybrids have such a long life expectancy? And where will they be staying while all these things are taking place on the Earth? Spaceships look quite small, and I don't think they will be happy to stay there bumping into each other for an extended period of time. But there are solutions to these problems. While the Earth remains unable to support life, the hybrids can be relocated to another planet and proliferate there. Regardless of their life expectancy, they can maintain a sizable population through reproduction until the time is ripe on the Earth. Moreover, they have half human gene, so what would all the genetic engineering have been about if they are not meant to come back to the Earth? So the third scenario has answers to all these questions. The real weakness is this: why will they go through the hassle of remigration to the Earth when they have happily settled in their own world? I accept that this protest is quite reasonable, and it sounds all the more so given that they have alien genes that undoubtedly will assist them to assimilate to a different planetary environment. We have a very little hint about aliens' intention, and these three scenarios are equally all plausible, or for the same reason, equally implausible. Whichever scenarios you might prefer, they have all one common assumption: the impending demise of human civilization.
The abduction phenomenon is clandestine. And the way it is clandestine is that the way the secrecy prevails is that first and foremost, the abductees are not allowed to remember what happened to them, obviously. And so when they do remember, it's not a full memory. It's in bits and pieces of memory. It's got dream material in it. It has material of maybe perhaps some popular culture in it, and it's severely truncated usually, and sometimes people say things that literally never happened, using hypnosis to find out what did happen, and in fact nothing happened that they said. They were abducted, but all abductions, all of them that I have looked at, are physical. People are physically missing from their normal environments. They might be missing for 2 or 3 hours, where people search for them and call them, and they're not there, and there's an emergency call that they missed, and this and that, and parents have searched for their children, and children have searched for their parents. This is common. Therefore, they are taken when they are missed the least. That means that they're not taken out of work, because that would be damaging in a sense. They're not taken when they're in the middle of a party, although sometimes that happens. Wander into the backyard and don't come back for a couple hours. They're oftentimes taken at night when they're alone. They don't have to be asleep. It's not sleep paralysis, has nothing to do with it, anything that has to do with sleep. But that's when they'll be missed the least. And so the clandestine nature of it prevents people from knowing. I'm going to throw out an erroneous number. I'm going to say maybe 90% of people who are abductees do not know that they are abductees.
How does that work?
Well, they have had unusual experiences. They might have unusual displacements in time and place. They're doing something at 1 o'clock, and then suddenly they're across the street and they're doing something else, and it's 3 o'clock. And they think, gosh, that was weird. What happened? And then they think, well, I'm just not going to think about this. And because their abductees are not supposed to remember, and they sort of know that, and they just go about their business. Other ones incorporate it into their lives thinking, this is just the way life is. Oddly enough, but I have had that. Now, people see other people being abducted and are not abducted themselves. People are abducted in groups and can confirm each other's abductions. People can sometimes, and this happens, meet other abductees at random, run into them on the street or something like that, and each one recognizes each other from being together on an abduction event. It's rare, but it does happen. And so there's a physicality to this. It's not a mentality. By looking at people over decades, I can see change in time. I can recognize differences that are happening. I can see the progression of the phenomenon. And I've been extremely fortunate to be able to do that. There's obviously a trajectory to the abduction phenomenon. It is not an examination of people. These aliens are not interested in what makes us tick. We used to think this years ago. I used to think this years ago.
What do
but
you think now?
this is turns out to be a program with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it is goal-directed. And what we're looking at here is a workforce that is abducting people, and how can I just say this straight out? Creating other beings who we call hybrids, who are different stages of hybrids, although it's probably more of a smooth continuum than my stage idea, of early stage hybrids who look sort of like gray aliens, and middle stage and late stage and human stage, and then what I call hybrid, who are beings who, and this is new information, who are being trained to live here, and their training comes from abductees. There are 3 pillars to the abduction phenomenon. Number 1, it's intergenerational. If a person is an abductee, their mother or their father, or sometimes both, were abductees. If they were abductees, almost certainly their mother or father was an abductee. When the abductee has children, and let's just say has 2 kids, they will be abductees. And when they marry a non-abductee, all of their children, the 2 kids' children, if they each have 2 each, that's 4, they will all be abductees. Therefore, the intergenerational aspect of it makes sure that there are plenty of abductees around. It keeps up with the population. And the second pillar is that it is global. This is not an American phenomenon. The UFO phenomenon has been noted around the world, and the UFO phenomenon is the abduction phenomenon. It is. They are one and the same, in my opinion. The third pillar is that it is clandestine. And the only way you can... in the thread, I wrote a long piece about the meaning of secrecy and how this has to be kept secret and that has to be kept secret and this and on, all the ramifications of non-secrecy and all that. It boils down to one sentence. They don't want us to know what they're doing. Global, intergenerational, secret. This does not add up to good. I don't see good in these 3 aspects of it. I can't be happy about it. So, because of the global nature, because of the clandestine nature, and because it keeps up with a booming human population. When I was born, there were 2.3 billion people on Earth. Now, I'm 73, there are 7.4 billion people on Earth in my lifetime. It's extraordinary. But the requisite number of abductees remains constant. If not, there are more than is needed now. So, when I say, what is the meaning of all this? Why are they doing this? I can boil it down to 2 words, and it's a guess. Because these beings do not say, but all the indications point to something I just call, in grandiose terms, planetary acquisition through creation of human-like hybrids. In other words, from the very beginning of our knowledge of the abduction phenomenon, the Antonio Villas-Boas case in 1957 in Brazil, placed into a room with this beautiful-looking, sort of human female, and he was required to have sexual intercourse. Then the very next case we discovered, the Barney and Betty Hill case in 1961, they took him, this is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they took him into a UFO, they did this to him and that to him, they took a sperm sample from Barney, and they injected a needle into Betty's navel, and she thought it might be a pregnancy test or whatever it is. Those 2 cases, which we did not recognize correctly, both had reproductive elements to them. We knew that Barney had had a sperm sample, but we just thought it was an examination, just to see what things are like, if that. We couldn't think about these cases. There wasn't enough knowledge to even think about these. So it doesn't mean anything. You can't think correctly about them.
How should we be thinking, or what are you referring to now then?
Well, virtually every abductee has had, if it's a male, has had sperm taken from them, and every woman has had eggs taken from them, ova. This is a reproductively oriented phenomenon, and it has been since the beginning. What they do is they take the sperm and eggs, they put them into a container, let's call it a petri dish, and I don't know the backstory here, and they alter the sperm and egg, sperm and egg fertilized, they alter it, and now I'm going to say something that is probably not true, but makes some sort of sense. With alien DNA, I do not know whether they put alien DNA in it, and I do not know whether aliens have DNA. So, but well, for the purposes of argument, we'll say that. They then take the zygote and implant it in the woman. At 10 or between 10 and 12 weeks, before she really begins to show at all, they remove it. And they place the fetus into a nutrient tank, of which there might be 100 nutrient tanks lined up in a room, or 50, or sometimes even more than 100. And from that, when they take the baby out, the baby looks either very human but somewhat hybridy, but somewhat alien-y, or half and half, or more human than alien, or much more human than alien, or even human and not alien. And I have different stages that I've thought about, but it's probably more of a smooth continuum. And the question is, why are they doing that? Because from the very first cases we ever discovered, there was that reproductive aspect to it, and it has remained rigidly constant throughout the decades. Absolutely. Now, the latest information is that these beings are, in fact, that the ones who look truly human and who are human and who look absolutely average are moving into towns, into apartments, between the ages of 17 and around 23 or so, in 2s and 3s and sometimes in 4s. And some of them are moving in independently into an apartment. They are using abductees to help them assimilate themselves into what normal human society is. Now, there's a backstory to this, too, as well, what happens when they're children and all that. And there's only one very slight, hardly noticeable difference between them and us. They can control us neurologically, make us think anything that they want us to think, make us say anything they want us to say, make us do anything they want us to do, and we cannot do that to them. That makes us a second-class species, not a citizen, but a species, and them a first-class species. There's an enormous imbalance there that is insurmountable. That's the problem. That is the problem. This is a workforce we're looking at, from a top to bottom corporate workforce. Gray aliens are probably hybrids, in my opinion. The ones who are the leaders are what we call the insect-like ones. Whether they have anything to do with insects, I don't know, but they have triangular heads and they're very thin. People say they look like praying mantises. But I think they are the ones who give orders and everybody else takes orders. And the more you look at this, the more rational it becomes. It's a rational program. It's not like this is so bizarre we can't even get our minds around it. It is not like that. We are capable of understanding what is happening. And so even though there are millions of people who think that this is benevolent and wonderful, which is okay, there are millions of people who are not so sure about that, who are abductees also.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob.
Thank you.
This is a serious situation. I look at this and I think to myself, I don't think that my sons are going to be living the lives that they think they're going to be living. You know, they're both older, but I fear for the future. I never would have imagined myself saying something like that some years back, but now I have no choice. The evidence is overwhelming. It's sort of mind-boggling that this is happening and that it's headed towards something. They're not doing this because they're experimenting on us or anything like that. This is headed towards what I would imagine to be a major event where they will suddenly take over the Earth for reasons that we do not know.
Well, this brings us to the change, and you've written about this, and I wonder, we've got about 10 minutes remaining here. Can you
talk about what is this change? You got this this phrase from a number of your folks. What can you say about this?
Well, one of my books, people began to tell me that that the aliens were telling them that soon there was going to be a change. The change was coming. Everybody was going to know his place. It was going to be wonderful. The change is coming. The change will be. And I always wondered what the change was. Mm-hmm. And I would ask abductees, well, what is the change? They must have told you what the change is going to be. Nobody knew. And if you think if this were psychological, well, everybody would know, and it might be different for every person, but they would say, well, the change is when this, that, whatever. Mm-hmm. But nobody knew. So, and let me just say also that nobody was aware that other people were saying that, obviously. Right. When I began to understand that these aliens were now coming down to Earth and beginning to live here, then I began to realize that the change was that this was, in fact, a takeover situation, and that the change for these aliens was that the Earth would be changed because they would then be in control. That's my best guess. And they would be living here, and they couldn't care less about the ones who are normal humans. They've got their own humans that they've been making, so to speak. But whatever it is, this planet will be theirs, I think. That's my best guess. They've been doing this for a long time. There's a reason for it. It's not just because they like examining humans. No. There's a reason for it. Mm. They are working towards this change of people who will be living here, I think. That's my best guess.
I've actually wondered that this would be actually an ideal society for them to conquer or to take over if they wanted. We're just on the verge of developing, implementing worldwide 5G smart device technology where every device is talking to every other device. The ability for a complete 24/7 surveillance into everyone's home is a reality. And just imagine hijacking that kind of infrastructure. It's like ready-made for them. They've got the neurological control, and if you put them in, strategic places within global society, they actually could have the capability to control even beyond their neurological limitations of power. You know what I mean?
It is certainly possible. Anything is possible with these beings. You have to remember that these are extremely advanced people, so to speak. Their UFOs simply disappear, or else they fly so fast away somewhere that nobody can see them fly. It's faster than the speed of light. You'll notice that on board a UFO, they're flying here, they're flying there, whatever. People do not feel any gravitational pull like you are in an airplane. If it suddenly starts to make a left bank, your body sort of moves to the right a little bit. Mm-hmm. Nobody has ever described anything like that. We have no knowledge of what their life is like outside of what people describe to us. We don't know whether aliens of any type sleep. We don't know how we know how gray aliens eat, but we don't know whether the other two, the Insectalins or the reptilians, whether they eat or not. We don't know how they get fuel. We don't know anything, but what we do know is that this is extremely advanced technology. It's not just one layer above us. They have come through space from somewhere, for who we don't know where, and flown here and have decided to take over. God, I hate to say this because it sounds so crazy, but to take over the planet, if you will. And they've done this before, almost certainly, and they're doing it in a routine fashion. They are extremely advanced. It's not like they're a few years ahead of us, or 10 years ahead of us, or even 100 years ahead of us. They might be 1,000 years ahead of us for all we know. And they're smart. and they retain things in their brains, just like we do, and they learn things just like we do, and all that. Now, I'm not talking about gray aliens necessarily, because they're different. They're workers who are created to do work.
You're talking about the Insectalins, the ones at the top of the chain.
I'm talking about the ones in charge, the Insectalins especially, and hybrids, because hybrids have human DNA in them, and they've got they have brain power that human beings don't have, and they can all talk telepathically. Now, of course, all abductees talk telepathically too, but mainly on board a UFO. So
what can we do? Is there? I mean, you've mulled this over 1,000 times or more, I'm sure, and I don't know if you have any answers. But have you thought of? Is there any hope? Is there anything that humanity can do in the face of this threat?
I don't know if there's anything that humanity can do in the face of this threat. The problem is that people of goodwill who are intelligent, far more intelligent than I am, need to get together and understand what is happening and then try to figure out some way of dealing with it. It may be too advanced to deal with it. It may be too late to deal with it, but at least we might have some sort of a fighting chance. That is not happening. As you know, there's an ongoing study of UFOs, and Luis Elizondo, I guess is his name, has been going around to different UFO conferences and talking about what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And what the group is doing is primarily trying to see whether UFOs are real, as if this were 1947.
Exactly.
I asked Elizondo, well, have you been doing any research into the abduction phenomenon? He said he's not at liberty to tell me that. So they may be doing something, but it's small potatoes. It's tiny. What they should be doing is contacting me, for example, who spent my most of my life studying UFOs and abductions, and Yvonne Smith and others who do this kind of research.
Agreed.
And debriefing us in terms of what we found and all the rest of that stuff. And they would start doing abduction research also, because that is the only way you can get inside a UFO, period. You can't get inside it. They're studying the outside shells of objects. They're not studying what's going on inside. Inside is the important part. So they would then start doing hypnosis with abductees, and they would realize the import of this, and there would be thousands of them doing abduction research now as we speak. And we would know it, because abductees would eventually tell us. That has not happened. It is not happening. They're still trying to figure out whether UFOs are real. This is nonsensical. It is beyond stupid. It's criminal.
Yeah, really, the only hope would be worldwide wake up right now or yesterday or last week and move in a coordinated effort to understand and then hopefully deal with this challenge. That's never happened with our society, with the world. We're still in this little fairy tale of UFOs. Are they real? Are they not here? Are we alone in the universe? Like these first grade level questions that just keep us spinning around in circles, unfortunately.
That is exactly correct. It makes me angry. It's just it's just craziness. It's absolute craziness. This is a global phenomenon. People around the world are reporting the same things. They're seeing the same things as they have always seen them for decades and decades and decades, and now they're saying the same thing. Now, here's another way of looking at this. Supposing none of this is true. Mm-hmm. Supposing there aren't no aliens up there who are kidnapping people. And yet, all around the world, people are saying the same things about the abduction phenomenon. And it's happening to them. And it's not happening. If that's the case, then we have stumbled on one of the most important aspects of human mentality, so to speak.
Psychological aberrations.
Right. Around the world, all saying the same things with these same psychological aberrations, and not knowing that other people are saying the same things.
Right. Well, one thing that
is, well, about to say that is profoundly important. You'd think that scientists would get interested in this fake phenomenon that everybody is talking about.
Well, I think that's much more unlikely than the actual likelihood that there are others who are walking among us and are here. The one hope, the only thing that I could say is the silver lining here is that they must operate clandestine. They must be secret, and so therefore my assumption is if they were not operating in secrecy, we would have the ability to oppose this program. So there's always that.
That is right. Because they're secret, it means that that they're afraid of something.
Right.
That they're not in total control. That there's something else that they want to. They can't let us know about it because it's a weakness of theirs. There's a weakness there. We don't know what the weakness is. We don't know if we could ever stop it. That's for sure. But we don't have enough super intelligent people to get together by the hundreds, if not the thousands around the world and try to figure out what can we do about this phenomenon. And as long as they're secret and as long as nobody knows, then they're pretty free. But the point is that there has to be some sort of weakness there because they are secrets.